Wow, impressive. You all stopped talking right away. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad there's such a good, lively crowd here for this wonderful event. I'm Wim de Wit. I'm the head of the Department of Architecture and Contemporary Art at the Getty Research Institute. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Modern Art in LA conversation, Assemblage and Politics. This evening's event is a part of the region-wide Pacific Standard Time initiative and is presented in conjunction with the exhibitions Cross Currents in LA, Painting and Sculpture 1950 to 1970, which is on view at the J. Paul Getty Museum, and Greetings from LA, Artists and Publics at the Getty Research Institute. And if you have not seen them yet, these two exhibitions, please come back soon because they are really worth your time spending in the galleries. In many ways, of course, this event speaks to the whole of Pacific Standard Time, which started as a research and archival initiative dedicated to preserving the important historical record of Los Angeles art and grew to encompass over 60 cultural institutions across the region. The works, practices, and issues that we will be discussing this evening relate to many other exhibitions across the city, and the artists that join us are represented in shows at, among other places, the Hammer Museum, LACMA, MoCA, the California African American Museum, and the Laguna Art Museum. Throughout the development of Pacific Standard Time, oral history interviews, group discussions, and public conversations have been a crucial way for scholars and curators to understand the history of a number of distinct art forms that emerged and flourished in Southern California. The artists that join us this evening were pioneers and proponents of one such art form, assemblage, which emerged and continues to thrive in Southern California as a powerful tool of social critique and transformation. The works that they made from found objects and materials reflect on the charged political climate of the postwar and contemporary periods. This event is one in our Modern Art in LA series, and I would like to thank those people who have worked hard to make sure that the event comes together. Shannon Arakaki, Michelle Fahmy, Joshua Mashat, Liz McDermott, Melissa Piper, Jennifer Smith, and Catherine Taft, as well as the team in the communications department. And of course, I would like to thank our participants who have given their time to be with us this evening to share their thoughts. Ed Bereal, Mel Edwards, George Herms, Nancy Reddin Kienholz, and Betye Saar. To introduce our speakers, I will turn things over to this evening's moderator, my colleague Lucy Bradnock, who is a research associate at the Getty Research Institute, a contributing author and editor of the Getty's Pacific Standard Time book, and a part of the research and curatorial team that worked on the Cross Currents exhibition. But before I do that, I'm first going to ask you to take your phone and to turn it off, or at least put it on vibrate so that we don't hear it during the event. Thank you very much, and please welcome Lucy.
Thank you, Wim, and thanks very much to all of you who have taken your time to join us this evening. There is a veritable assemblage of traffic cones outside our front door, and we do appreciate your braving the traffic to join us on a Wednesday night. Our focus this evening is the practice of making works out of found, scavenged, or otherwise appropriated materials, a practice referred to variously as found object sculpture, junk art, mixed media, or following the lead of MoMA curator William Seitz in 1961, assemblage or assemblage. Many artists, both in California and elsewhere, turned to discarded materials, the detritus and debris of everyday life, to create poetic, lyrical, political, and often unsettling works of art, to challenge the conventions of art and society. In Los Angeles, assemblage proved a particularly enduring medium, one that continues to offer artists a powerful mode of social and political critique. We are hugely fortunate tonight to be able to welcome 5 artists who turned to assembled and accumulated sculpture to make works that engage with the rise of consumer culture in the art market in the post-war and contemporary periods, that addressed political issues, including the actions of the House Un-American Activities Committee, the Civil Rights Movement, the war in Vietnam, and the censorship of art, This evening, they are going to join us to share their thoughts on the nature of assemblage and its emergence in post-war Los Angeles as a powerful tool of political critique and social transformation. In today's political climate, of course, that work continues to be extremely vital and relevant, and all of our participants this evening continue to make works that challenge and that inspire. I'll introduce them now before they join the stage, and then invite them to join us to begin our conversation. Ed Bereal, our first speaker tonight, attended Chouinard Art Institute, and in 1962 his early assemblage works were included in the controversial War Babies exhibition at Weissman Gallery. Following the Watts Rebellion in 1965, Bereal turned increasingly away from sculptural practice and towards radical theatre, in 1969 founding the activist theatre group The Bodacious Bugarilla. Bereal has taught at universities throughout the United States and has been a mentor to generations of artists. Our second participant this evening, Mel Edwards, grew up in Houston, Texas and Dayton, Ohio, before moving to Los Angeles in 1955. He studied at the Los Angeles City College, the Los Angeles County Art Institute, and the University of Southern California. In 1960, he learned to weld and began to produce both small-scale abstract wall sculptures and larger pieces that incorporate chains and other metal elements. His solo exhibitions, like most of our participants this evening, are too numerous to list them all, but they include shows at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the New Jersey State Museum. A 30-year retrospective of Edwards' sculpture was held in 1993 at the Neuberger Museum of Art in Purchase, New York. Our third participant, Nancy Reddin Kienholz, was born in LA and from 1972 collaborated with Ed Kienholz to create complex assemblage tableaux that raise questions about the inhumanity of contemporary society and address social taboos. From 1983 to 88, they worked together on the Hurengracht, a large-scale tableau that encapsulated many of the earlier material and social concerns of her and Ed's practice, as do other major works from that period, including the Ozymandias Parade and My Country 'Tis of Thee, and I think we'll probably look at images of both of those tonight. Their work was included in a great number of exhibitions in the US, Europe, and Japan. Since Ed's death in 1994, Nancy's practice has continued to reflect those similar political and social concerns. Betye Saar was born also in Los Angeles, grew up in Pasadena, and spent summers with her grandmother in Watts. She studied design at UCLA and graduate printmaking at the Pasadena City College, before beginning to incorporate her prints into frames and to add other found materials that reference the construction of identity and the pervasion of social inequality. Saar has had solo exhibitions, again, amongst other places, at the Whitney Museum, the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and the Des Moines Arts Center, and her work appears in museum collections nationally and internationally. And our final participant, last but not least, George Herms, grew up in California and started to make found object works in the late 1940s, becoming a key figure in a group of artists that included Wallace Berman and Bob Alexander. Herms's exhibitions have been many and varied, from his 1957 secret exhibition held on a vacant lot in Hermosa Beach to his inclusion in the seminal 1961 exhibition, The Art of Assemblage, 50 years ago at the Museum of Modern Art, New York, and his 1979 retrospective, The Prometheus Archive at the Newport Harbor Art Museum. A long-standing proponent and teacher of assemblage, Herms has expanded the medium into performance, producing and starring in an impressive assemblage opera last year. As part of that opera, George encouraged members of the audience to contribute to a chorus of cell phones. We will not be attempting that this evening, so I would echo Wim's request that you silence your machines, and please join me in welcoming our guests to the stage. Well, it's like having superstars up here. It's fantastic. It is, you're right, it is having superstars up here. Well, welcome all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Can you hear me all right? Okay, good. Sorry. It's a real pleasure to have all of you here tonight, and I know that we're going to have a fun and a lively discussion. We'll be opening this up for questions a little later on, so those of you in the audience who want to chime in or want to ask any one of our participants something, hold your thoughts, and we'll do that at the end. But perhaps to start us off, I could ask you all to tell us a little bit about how you came to work with found materials, and what made you choose found materials and found objects over any other kind of sculpture or painting practice. Maybe you'd like to start.
I'd like to start?
Well, I would like you to start.
No, it's fine.
You sat nearest to
You
me,
were
so
looking
you'll
right
be
at
picked
me.
on.
I knew it was going to happen. It's okay. I'm not sure that there was a choice. I was learning to weld. First of all, I should say I started primarily as a painter. Most of my school years were as a painter. And I saw a couple of graduate students welding, George Baker and Robert Bassler. Baker was teaching a class at night, and I took a class to learn to weld. George laid out 6 pieces of steel, showed me how to lay a bead on them, in other words, to join them, and said, leave me alone because I'm working on my graduate program. And that was basically it in terms of the process. But the material was steel. And ultimately, it wasn't so much that things were found, but steel was just a very common material. It had more resistance than most other materials, and that seemed to appeal to me. It was instinctive. I don't think there was any particular aesthetics at that time. However, I gradually started to develop ideas in later years, say 3 or 4 years later, which clearly painting was not right for. Sculpture was right. And so it wasn't that there were found objects, it was that I was looking for steel and economically finding it where I could or buying it where I could. I would go to scrap yards. I'm never sure that term that stuck, found objects or junk, and stuff like that, really applied. It was material. And just, and I've stayed consistently and primarily with steel, though in much larger pieces, stainless steel and, other variants of the material. And I buy it, steal it, do whatever thing I need to get.
By any means necessary.
Yeah. And also the process of construction is more important. That is, assembling things is a part of, or a way, or another word perhaps, for the idea of constructing things. Where the work, the thing that I end up making in various years or at various times had elements which you might say poetically, or in ideas or ways of people possibly reading ideas that I was interested in them. Then certain ones like chain became significant elements. However, not as singular ideas, but as multiple. In other words, chain is used for all kinds of purposes, and in singular readings wouldn't work. Just as for that's some found sound that I've
I'm hoping that these are teething problems. But that idea of one object that can have several different meanings is an interesting one, and one I think that really applies to the work of perhaps all of you on the panel tonight. So I wonder, Betty, maybe you could talk to us a little about how those found materials function in your work, because you also started off in painting and in printmaking, and then kind of moved towards found objects and found materials.
I can hear out of this ear anyway, but just say.
Take the microphone here.
What was it?
Somebody was calling.
We're having some technology issues. Do bear with us. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Well, my story is quite different. I think it really began when I was a child and being the kind of curious kid about finding stuff in the backyard and in the trash, and being a child of the Depression where you had to recycle things normally. You know, you had to be very careful. You didn't always have brand new crayons or things like that. And then my grandmother lived in Watts, so I also saw Simon Rodilla building the Watts Tower, so that was always a fascination. I was a kid with a lot of imagination and fantasy and magic, and those things were really important to me. That kind of turned up when I became an artist. My training was in design, and it wasn't until I was going to take some graduate studies that I got into printmaking and started using prints and drawings and windows and so forth. And also seeing the work of Joseph Cornell in Pasadena Museum, where I found that you could take things that you find and make it into something called art. That was a real fascination for that. But I collected for about 3 years, just finding things, going to thrift stores. There weren't that many flea markets and yard sales, going through trash bins and finding things. And for me, the materials always had like a past life and then the life with me, and then after recycling them, going out and having their own life as art, so to speak. So that's sort of my background about working with found objects.
And how was it that you decided which objects to choose as you were going through a yard sale or in a thrift store? Was it a particular kind of object that you were drawn to, or was it really a range?
Yes, that I was drawn to, or maybe a box, and then I think I could fill it with something, or I went sometimes to antique stores, but everything was too neat and too perfect. I liked the grunge part of it, of really discovering something and reconverting it, recycling it into something else. But there is kind of like an unspoken language of finding an object that may be used, you know, and sometimes just going to places like, especially when I travel to another country, you know, to find a shop, I know I won't go in there, I won't find anything. But then in a hidden corner or something, there might be something that would be of interest to me. So it's more like, we can all dance to that.
Does anyone else have
Not
a
my
mobile
cell
phone?
phone, because she's got it.
I know, she's taking
I don't have mine.
Anyone else? There we go. So there's an element of the kind of treasure hunt about it.
A
This
treasure
idea of-
hunt was that. That was always sort of finding something when you wouldn't really normally find something special.
Yeah, and I think that moment of surprise is a real magical element that kind of reminds us of surrealism in a way, that kind of unexpected discovery.
Yes.
George, maybe you could say something to how you came to work with found materials, which was, I think, in the late 1940s.
That's too soon.
Too soon?
I don't think, yeah.
Or the early 1950s.
Well, up until 1940, when I was 5 years old, I peaked. And then
So
after
not
that-
collecting found
After
objects
that,
then.
then you get to Wallace Berman, Ed Kienholz, John Reed, Bob Alexander, and Robert Motherwell's, what's it called, Dada Painters and Poets. And I was looking to see what I was going to do with my life. Not unlike tonight. And these people were all in full stride, man, you know, doing their thing. Mel, you know what I'm talking about. And all I wanted to do was emulate them. I had no idea you're supposed to start off as like an apprentice, journeyman, and then, you know, I just started making masterworks because that's what I did. But for me, it was beachcombing, you know, and then you just take beachcombing into the alleys, into the city, and just continue that. Everybody does it, you know. You pick your favorite things, and you take them home and you make a little shrine out of it. So besides what all you people know about in the art thing, there's shrines all over in the wilderness of California I taught my kids, I said, when you go to the seashore, you don't have to take it all home with you. Why don't you make a little shrine and say, thanks a lot. What a great day. I get to sit next to Nancy and Betty. Hey.
He
And
does
so
that
George,
to people.
I know, he
Yeah,
just stops. And so George, for you, was it a very self-consciously surrealist practice? I mean, were you emulating, say, Wallace Berman and...
Definitely.
Or was it
I got to ride shotgun with him when he hung the show at Ferris. And he turned an art gallery into a temple. And I said, Jesus, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. So all of the other thing, which we might as well get out on the table, just so that we can, it's a table. We have a table here. That the California Assemblage thing is an incredible hoax that was pulled on the public by Kienholz and Berman and Walter Hopps and Bob Alexander and John Reed, and they got me to be the poster boy for this thing called California Assemblage, and they made me go out and do this shit for the last 50 years, and I'm tired of it. And that's surrealism.
Well, we're not gonna let you rest
You
yet,
can't
George.
quit.
No, I can't do it.
No, you're addicted to it.
Well, I feel like George has accused Ed Kienholz. And so maybe Nancy, given that Ed is no longer with us, you might like to talk a little bit about the role that found objects played, and assemblage, if we're going to call it that, played in your and Ed's practice.
Well, first of all, it was economics. Plain and simple.
Mm-hmm.
There was no money. So you do the best you can do. And Ed, when in his young years, he would pick up cars that were, see, I'd take your old junk car and he'd take them out and he'd sell them to, the junkyard to get enough money to go ahead and go on and so forth. And so, of course, being at the junkyard, he would find things. But it really, was economics in the beginning. And the thing is, if you find an object that is a used object, it has a certain patina on it that is not available in something that is new. And it's very hard to recreate patina. And so, and of course it's fun to look for it. Sometimes you look for specifics, sometimes you just look for magic.
And so it seems to me that idea of a patina or something that is old or used or outmoded seems to have come up in what you were saying earlier, Betty and George and Nancy too. So what is it about the old object or the discarded object? Is it a relation to the kind of brand new consumer culture in the 50s, or is it something about a kind of aura that object has?
It has a history. It has a history and a kind of energy, that about it, that when you combine it with something else, you're creating that's just like, for me, it's just like building one kind of energy, one kind of combination, either it's pattern or the object itself or the material. And because I feel that I tell a story, I don't know what the story is, but I'm telling the story with the things I combine. It's like each of them are writing a paragraph or a sentence or something to that story. And it's just the way it is with me.
Yeah, and Ed, we've talked about the kind of process that you go through when you're selecting objects, and I would be interested to hear your thoughts and anyone else's thoughts on the relationship between that past that the object has and the kind of new role that it has in the artwork. Perhaps you could take us through exactly what process you go through negotiating that past history and then the new meaning that you're finding in that object or in that combination of objects.
Well, I think there's an authenticity to I'll use found object, but I like Mel's statement about materials. They're materials, but they're materials with a history and with a certain kind of power that they intrinsically have, I think. A lot of what I do is kind of nonverbal, and so there's a sense that I get from the things that I find, the things that I want to say, there's some kind of conversation that goes on between the various materials that you use and their vibe or their power, and they kind of you put two things together and something else starts to happen because of what they look like. Patina is really important. And again, there's a kind of authenticity to the materials that you're playing with. I think a lot of it, for me at least, has to do with what I want to say. And I don't know necessarily when that starts, but it starts percolating and you're trying to put together a gumbo, you know, and you find a piece and that starts to talk to you a little bit, and this one does too. And at one point, there's a real panel going on in your studio, and hopefully it starts. And I heard something that Betty said. You don't know quite where that's going, but you're riding it, and hopefully it takes you. Generally, it takes you to a place that you didn't know you were going to be at. You get informed. It makes a statement, and maybe even suggests the next piece you're going to make.
And so is it important for you and for your viewer then to know what the past life of that object is? Or is it more of a kind of formal material component?
Well, a water fountain's a water fountain, right? Or a spigot's a spigot, okay? And it's an old spigot, and you look at it, and it's got a shape, and it's got a prior, probably utilitarian aspect to it, except it, you know, and we all know what it does. You turn it and something comes out. Well, you attach that to a mobile oil can, and now it's starting to say maybe some other stuff. I think that's kind of what I do.
And I was interested that you said just a few moments ago that you don't really have a verbal process. But George, a lot of the people that you mentioned as influential on your becoming an artist and an assemblage artist were poets, people like Bob Alexander and John Reed. So do you also see those objects as more kind of material elements, or is there more of a kind of verbal process going on when you're making those sculptures?
I don't think you can separate them. The object has its voice. Excuse me, this is my voice. And it's a found voice. I came here. But the poets, see, before, if you look at, we're celebrating 50th anniversary of Bill Seitz putting on a show called Art of Assemblage in New York. That's 50 years ago. So we all need to celebrate that. And in his essay, which I never read for like 20 years, 20 years, give me a break, 20 years, and then I went from Orange, where my studio was like a brick oven in the afternoon. I would go to Laguna and hand write out Bill Seitz's essay. And there's some absolutely jewels in there. The objects are associationally alive. That's why one works with these objects. They're associationally alive. They have a life already. Yeah. For me, it was like, and then they shit-canned it and threw it away. And I said, wait a minute, it's got some more life in it. Let's bring it back into a work of art. But that catalog starts out with the liberation of words, then it's the liberation of objects. And so it's the poets, Apollinaire, these people at the beginning of the 20th century started to break it all apart. And then you have Picasso and Braque, breaking everything else apart. And it continues, for me, throughout the 20th century, trying to reverse the age of reason, where everything was cut and dried, like my grandfather, entomology, butterflies all in rows like this with Latin names. That's the age of reason. I thought the world was going to be like that, the universe, but no. As soon as you hit puberty, all that.
Oh, man.
So it's the poets with their liberation of words and language that precedes the objects. And especially for me, the poets and the musicians were the ones who were role models for me, that were exploring usage. What does that mean, Mel? The poets didn't do it for you?
Well, one, I'm married to a poet. So, no, but, and I made a piece of sculpture which it's large. It's about 10 by 8 feet high, and it's a rocker, one of the kinetic pieces that I developed in the years. But I titled it Before Words, because the important thing, probably to all of us, as human beings, is to learn to communicate. And what form that takes is in great variety in the world, in languages, in ways of using the body, the ways of using the objects or the things in the world. And I titled that piece, which is a rocker. In other words, it has the possibility of movement if a person activates it. Otherwise, its balance keeps it in one basic position. So in other words, applying our intellect or our instincts or our frivolity to whatever we're approaching, whatever materials we're working with, is what sets into motion our creativity and the possibilities, or the experimental thing that we're, or at least in my case, that I was always functioning with and still work that way. Everything starts as an experiment, but of course it starts with materials and ideas that I have, and then the ideas that develop in the process. In other words, in relation to music, musicians will start with a theme or an idea and improvisationally develop those ideas, and they get the coherent thing that they develop. That then becomes a thing in itself, which can be itself improvised upon and developed further. In other words, theme and variations is a general way to say it, but the truth is it can be endless. So whatever we start with, and then wherever we go. In my case, I feel like it's limitless, and that was a part of the original interest in trying to work in those ways. As far as the poets, of course, they experiment with words, language, and sound, and we do our experimenting in the realm of the three-dimensional, and if we're lucky, the fourth dimension as well.
And it seems like that kind of experimentation with one theme, or kind of experimenting and altering and coming back to an idea, was something that you looked at in your Lynch Fragments series. And we've got a couple of them on screen here, and a third. These are the three that are in the exhibition upstairs. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if you could say something about that kind of repeated return to...
Well, okay, there's just a direct history. The piece on the right, that's Afro Phoenix #1, and the next piece, Sunday, spelled Sonday, and then the other piece is Inside and Out, or Inside Out. And for me, the piece called Afro Phoenix really reflected on the idea that African American culture came from a long history of things, and it was constantly renewing itself in the thousands of years prior to the American experience, and then within the American experience, developmental stuff as well. Certain things people commonly know about, say jazz, people know that that's probably the most significant development in music in the Western Hemisphere in the last 500 years. But they're not apt to pay attention to the visual art of the same people, because our relationship to what we did in visual art was not in front of the society in that kind of direct way that music. And we also didn't have the evolution and invention of the radio and the media, which moved the 20th century, especially for people who work with words and sound, And I, fairly young, was actually aware of that. So our inside and our outside, what was in us and was apparent outside, could be very different things, but they happen. Sunday really was titled that because it was a reference to the prodigal son, that idea. And really, from the Rembrandt, it's either a drawing or an etching, but titled The Prodigal Son, that I was aware of. And that's the basis of those pieces. As far as the form, which are similar, three-dimensionally, they're reliefs, but they're pyramidal in projection. And there again, and as far as the horseshoe and the cross, those forms in my head were references to what I call the interest in changes of fate, that human beings felt they needed to do more than just approach life, but have objects which might symbolize that they wanted their fate to be changed. So Christians wear little crosses. There are horseshoes for good luck, and if they're turned down, it means bad luck. And all over the world, people use things like that. So it's just a matter of that. And so in those years, in my 20s, as opposed to 74, yeah.
And I think this idea of inside and out, and these kind of personal stories, like as in Sunday and your kind of personal identification with that story, and these maybe bigger questions about humankind and humanity seems to play out in some of the ways in which other artists on this panel have engaged with maybe more social or political ideas. Betty, I wonder if you could say something to that relationship between your personal history and your personal narrative in your work and those sort of slightly broader questions of identity. So if we look at, flick really quickly. So some of your works that use or have contained references to your family history or your personal history, what are the stories that you're telling with those works?
Well, the window is called Black Girl's Window, and it is like an autobiographical piece with the head and the hands pressed against the window. It's like looking out, but also was looking behind the glass. And when I discovered that the window was a good vehicle to express myself of like both sides of a situation, but this particular one, because of my interest in astrology and metaphysics and palmistry and so forth, that's what the top part is about, one's destiny according to what time you were born and what the stars were and all the planets and all of that. And then I think I have one that has a phrenology thing, and the center is death. This is a piece that's in the museum here, and with the phrenology chart, and it's not really personal as the other one, but it expresses, like most of my early work, or much of my early work, dealing with the unknown and how one's destiny might pertain to what planet you were born under and so forth. That was really fascinating to me as an adult, and it's like the fairy tales when I was a kid of getting acquainted with the unknown. That's it.
And Ed, I wonder if you could speak to some of the kind of imagery that comes up in your early work where we find some very strong symbols and, iconic shapes. I'm thinking particularly of works like American Beauty that again is in the Cross Currents show, and I will find on my images really
It's in there someplace.
It's definitely in there somewhere. I know exactly where it is, but it's just a long way from me.
I came to Chouinard Art Institute thinking that I was going to be an illustrator. And I met Bob Irwin, and that immediately changed a lot. We were wrestling at the time with abstract expressionism, and paintings are actually pictures of things as opposed to paintings that were things. And I got very much involved in, this painting I'm trying to do, which was hideous, was nevertheless a thing. And I would begin to try to examine it from that point of view. So instead of painting just on the front, I started painting around on the edge, on the sides, around the sides. And the next one, I had to make the sides like bigger, so I'd have more space to paint on, right? Because the thing isn't just the front aspect of it, it's the sides too. So I started painting, and after a while I'm painting on a box, right? The sides are as big as the front. And I started looking at that, and we always talked about what was arbitrary and what wasn't. So the box, the shape was kind of arbitrary. It didn't have to be a square kind of Euclidean geometric thing. So I started cutting basically the sides off of it and shaping it a little bit. And this is still a painting. It's still stretched canvas over stretcher bars. I was just starting to shape the stretcher bar. And gradually, more and more, it started taking on another kind of a life of its own. I was working at the time, putting myself through school as a mechanic. And so all those little gears and knobs and bolts and things like that, I thought, well, you know, a thing can have bolts. Why not, you know? So it started being that. The other big input for me was the Second World War. Because I used to love to watch or to look at Life magazine because it had really good pictures of all the war machines and all the activity that was going on. And I fell in love with the Nazis. You know, sorry, but they just had cooler stuff. And so basically, together with, as a kid, building model planes and so forth, all that information and all that stuff started coming together in these things. And that was kind of the gumbo that kind of started to produce the early pieces. After the Watts riots, though, the work got very much more political. But the swastika earlier was faced the other way for a lot of reasons, religious reasons, as well as I just liked it because it seemed to be a very powerful symbol. And I was a power nut, still am, actually. And it just made the pieces really very strong. After the Watts riots, though, then we can talk about that, a whole another kind of aesthetic started happening.
Well, let's talk about Watts, because Betty, you said that when you were young, you looked at Simon Radia's Watts Towers and you saw in them a kind of an inspiration to make art. Maybe actually we have an image of the Watts Towers. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what those towers represented to you. Somewhere.
Well, it was this man building these strange shapes. I was like 7 years old, so you know. Yeah, there it is, right there, and they were just fascinating to me. But for my daughter, Allison, who saw them when they were completed, I think when she starts to talk about her work, she says, "This is where I became an artist." Just seeing all the things, all the plates that were glued on it, and all those things of assembling different things. So her work is mixed media as well, and it wasn't until I was an adult where I got a chance to really examine them and to know that you could make art out of anything, because here was a man that found a broken plate that glued it on a steel structure, and they became one of the most fascinating pieces, certainly in California. But just the idea of collecting things and combining it had a kind of mystical, magical power.
And I think a power that went on beyond that. I mean, they feature very prominently in the catalogue of the exhibition that George was mentioning, The Art of Assemblage, which has a number of photos of the Watts Towers. And then, of course, in 1965, the Watts Rebellion came to this part of Los Angeles. And this Mel's photograph I recently discovered of that part of the city.
Well,
I think just
that's Central
after
Avenue, and a day or two after the most intense stuff, I went down taking photographs of people and situations. You know, you can even say for me, the Watchtowers, I had seen it. And in the early 60s, the city wanted to pull it down. And there were engineering tests that were taken, and they tried to pull it over with a crane. The crane went over, not the towers.
Right.
Occasionally I'd go out there. I didn't live in Watts. I lived on Vernon and Van Ness, you know, closer to Leimert Park or Crenshaw, in a building that housed the historical California Eagle Afro-American newspaper. But images in our community were dynamic. There are photographs that aren't here. There are mannequins in the store. All mannequins in the stores are never black people. They're just white or non-gender or anything, but usually pink. And in these stores, you'd see them knocked over as if the mannequins themselves had been attacked. That may or may not have been the case. But in any case, the images were there, and the images really suggest what's going on. There's one image, which again is not here, of a cash register laying in the street. Well, the whole thing is about economics and people disappointed in having migrated from other places to California, the promised land, which did not fulfill its promises. And sooner or later, something was going to happen, and it did, you know. The dynamics of the period naturally affected everybody. My first one-man show with the lynch fragments was 6 months before the riot, so my work is not a response to that. But inside of it is a response to the socio-political dynamics which were affecting all of us, you know, so not just in the United States, but around the world, because in 1965, a few African countries by then had their independence, but for the most part, the dynamics of African people all around the world was similar. And so naturally we had humanistic aesthetics, if you will. Sometimes those aesthetics came out in the art realm, other times they came out in the realm. But the greater aesthetic was that we wanted the world to be different than it was. And that's still the case, because it's still not a place with problems solved, you know.
Yeah, well, his thing was the Watts riots. For me, it was the murder of Martin Luther King. That was just like a fuse being lit, and then everything became obvious, mostly with watching things on television with the marches, with the dogs, and the hoses, and there became, at least for me, you know, I'm a little housewife with 3 children, that fuse was lit, and I could just feel that rage just coming up through me, and so the only place I could vent it was through my art, and that's when I invented Liberation of Aunt Jemima, taking a derogatory image, the way black people had been portrayed and accepted as, you know, always a working class, a slave, and having her become a warrior. So then I armed her with a rifle and hand grenades, and behind that is the backing of a commercial product which still had Aunt Jemima in the kitchen, and the black fist, which was the power symbol at that time to suggest, you know, and then when you think about that, at least when I think about it, it's like the fist kind of holding the rage, but at the same time ready to attack. And even now, when I get annoyed with certain things that bring up this rage, I'm putting it out there because, you know, I can't really fight anything, so, but I can make my art fight in a way. So, that period. Yeah.
And George, would you like to tell us a little bit about the kinds of images and narratives that you're responding to in your work? It was interesting to me that I think something that has been lurking underneath what a lot of you have said is this idea of a kind of a narrative, both an old narrative and a new narrative. And Betty, I think looking at a work like this, we see objects and images that have a history of being detrimental that are kind of reclaimed and repurposed in the service of anger, of power, and of a kind of almost a sort of energy revolution. George?
Well, I'd like to, just like at the end of a show, you say, I'd like to say you were a fantastic audience. I'd like to say that. However, you weren't. So I'm going to be back in 2 minutes. I'd like to answer your question.
Okay. And I think we've lost him. I'm
No,
hoping
he'll be back.
come back.
He'll be back.
He's a man of his word. He'll be back. Well, all right. It's on you two then.
What's the question?
Well, where's George gone?
Yes, where's George gone?
Well, let's...
I think he's old and he's got to pee.
Yeah, we'll let him do that. Well, Ed, perhaps, given that we have been talking about Watts, about the towers, about the Watts Rebellion, and about that mid-60s kind of moment where things exploded, you mentioned earlier that the rebellion for you really brought home the need to change your practice. So maybe you could tell us about that.
Well, at the time I was in the middle of the art world because of Chenard was a wonderful opportunity to, I was a country boy, I was from Riverside, California. And all I knew was oranges and working in the watermelon field. That's it. Well, but Chenard was a marvelous experience for me because I saw art through altogether different eyes, and I got caught up in the whole scene. You know, I was working at Ferris at the time as a person who unloaded Andy Warhols and did that kind of stuff. I was able to meet Marcel Duchamp and sit and talk with him. A lot of stuff like that was going on, and I guess I wasn't so much success oriented, but there was a kind of a ladder that happens within the art world, and I was kind of on that ladder. One night, well, at the time I spent most of my time in the studio, like 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, and that's all I did. And then at night I went to Barney's Beanery, talked to the other artists, drank myself silly, came home, and got up the next day, walked out, yawned, and went back to work. And that's all I did. I lost all social skills except, cursing at Barney's Beanery. One night I was on my way home, and I was smelling smoke. I was obviously a little not quite, I'd been drinking, and driving really slow, because that's what I do when I drink. And I was smelling smoke, and people were running all over the place, and I'm kind of going, wow, man, wow, And I pulled into my place, and the police cars were going all over, and I'm, whoa. But I didn't know what was happening. So I went in and I went to bed, and I got up and I walked out, getting ready to do the whole kind of my ritual of yawning, making sure the sun was there, and going to walk back in, except there was a Jeep parked out front with a .50 caliber machine gun on it. And it happened that the gun was pointed at my front door. You took the photograph of that front door. I walked out, there's a Neanderthal National Guard guy sitting behind the machine gun. And I'm looking at the gun, he's looking at me. He's got a freebie. And I was thinking, I remember the moment because I thought, if Irving Blum was standing in front of me, that wouldn't stop that bullet.
Better believe it.
And I could put several people in front of that muzzle, and it wouldn't stop the bullet. So I'm kind of going, then what I'm putting together doesn't take care of situations like this. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going, then what am I putting together? And what's going on? And why and I don't like to be surprised. I don't like to be, particularly about street kind of stuff. I don't like to be surprised. And I was caught with my undies down. And at that point I closed the studio. I stopped working. I shut the studio down. I went home to my mother and put my head on her breast and said, Mom, I stuck my thumb, and what's going on, And at that point, it became obvious that whatever work I did is going to have to be quite different. It's going to have to talk about different kinds of stuff. And like Betty, I'm looking to use the work to be my voice. I'm not good at carrying signs, and I'm not good about being nonviolent. So this is my way of maybe addressing issues.
I have a question. At first, when you were talking about your other career, did you feel like you were playing the art game?
I was not happy with the art world, but using a real hard judgment, I must.
Because if you were on one of those rungs of the ladder.
Yeah, I think I was part of something that I didn't really, even then, didn't quite like.
Yeah.
Right now, really didn't like. But to be honest, I was caught up in that art world a lot.
Yeah, that's when you knew that that wouldn't stop the bullet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the goals and the values of that world didn't have anything to do with that machine gun.
And you.
And me.
Yeah.
And what was very interesting was that the art world at that time, LA was on fire. If you got up in the Hollywood Hills and looked at it, there was smoke coming all over the place. People were getting killed, and the art world took no notice.
Yeah.
Well, if you thought the art world was the establishment, the galleries and the museum, that would be true.
Yes.
But, and in that sense it is. But if you were thinking about your work and your art, or I will say, not you, but, me in that situation. My growing up in Texas and coming to California at age 18, my expectations was, no, it was not a perfect place. There were opportunities in California, but I could immediately see, no, this is not all right. It has some advantages, but so I wasn't so surprised that things radicalized, because in the South, the rumblings already were there, and the North thinks or says it's separate from the South, but really, the transition is there, and the dynamics that are American are all over, in different kinds of concentrations, were and still are. And in that respect, I think, there was the murder by the police department of Stokes, the Muslim man, and I, to this moment, can visualize the photograph of his cadaver sewn up after, the autopsy and stuff. Now, he wasn't the first person in my life that I had understood that happening to somebody, and internationally it was happening, and I was paying attention. I was reading stuff. The ritual you spoke of, mine was similar. I'd get up in the morning, but I would go. I was already married and had a child. I'd go to steel yards in the east side of Los Angeles, buy some scrap steel, put it in my station wagon, stop on Central Avenue for a good Southern breakfast, and then go to Mr. Whitley's black bookstore, which was one of the few, and get reading material, which was everything from Richard Wright to Freedom Ways magazine and Rogers' History of the Black Man in the World, just a lot of things. Now, I was doing that before the riot happened, so it was already a part of my way of finding material for my hope for development as an artist. And at the same time, I'd had a very good conventional art education, having gone to Los Angeles City College, USC, Los Angeles County Art Institute, and a couple classes at UCLA. So education was very much, and I liked education. By the time I got my degree after 10 years, I'd already had credits enough for a master's, but I was getting a bachelor's. But more than that, I had a family. I'd had a one-man show at a museum, the Santa Barbara Museum. I was working my life through art, but I was doing the same kind of work anybody, delivering, picking up films for a film company. And my life was like any other working person in Los Angeles, except that as soon as I got home at 6 o'clock, I was focused to work on my sculpture until midnight, and that was the way I lived my life. I think for people who want to do something in this world, that's not actually extraordinary. That really, working people who have to make a living, but still want to do something beyond what they do, live that way until they have economics that are different than that. That's a set of aesthetic choices. In other words, the language of the world we call the art world, which there is no such planet, looking up anyway. But at the same time, no, it's a part of our reality, And if you do fairly well at it, you do start to move as Ed or any of us, But when in history is more movement possible? When is it possible to be sitting on a panel at the Getty Museum? Well, you got to be 74 years old and been through all this stuff, And, we're sitting here 74. I won't ask anybody else their age.
I very deliberately didn't mention any birth dates.
Yeah, but did it change when those things started happening around you?
No, it didn't change because I was already working on it.
No, but did the point of putting it together change?
No, because I was already working on it.
Yeah.
In my mind, I was on that point. If you, the work of mine that's here is all before the riots, before that.
Okay.
They are the Lynch Fragment series. They are,
But did you feel different when you were doing it?
No, because first of all, doing the work is such direct work that the feeling in doing the work is focused on the work.
Because you were welding, you were cutting
whatever
metal.
it takes, whatever it takes to do the work.
Yeah.
Other people talk about their emotional feelings within the work. I can't concentrate on work if I'm really dealing with my deeper emotions.
But also the material that you work with is
it
not
hadn't
really
changed.
No, but steel is quite different than finding some other kind of material. I mean, right away you think steel is going to be permanent. There's a kind of coldness. I don't think of steel as being emotional.
I never call the material emotional.
No,
it's the
but
emotion
I mean,
that we put in any
yeah.
material. So for me, I never said that, or would say that, you're a human being working, so you have emotion. How much emotion goes into the work, who's to say? But the other end of it is how much is felt by the viewer. That's the other part.
But that's the unknown.
Of course it's unknown.
Yeah.
I think all creativity, real creativity, is when you step into the unknown. It's what I don't know, is when I'm fairly sure that I'm getting to the creative point, because if it's something I already know, well, I have to create it, But it's just that way, for me, is the way of life of people who call themselves creative people, For somebody else, they may take another approach.
I think that idea of the materials having emotion or not is an interesting one, Betty, because it seems like you would think of your materials in that way. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, for example, a photograph that I use, that's full of emotion. But I'm always interested in somebody that can transfer emotion with a material that seems to be cold or indifferent.
Dizzy Gillespie. Dizzy Gillespie's horn got taken into the Smithsonian, that funny horn that sticks up. And there was a big ceremony when they brought the horn in. And he was being interviewed. And I think there was a woman interviewing him said, "Mr. Gillespie, now that your horn is in the Smithsonian, when children come and stand around and look at that horn, what's that horn going to say? And Dizzy, she didn't know. You don't ask him questions like that. What's the horn going to say? He said, that horn ain't going to say shit. He said, this is where the music is.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we've come back to that idea of inside and outside that we spoke of right at the beginning.
Yeah. If I could interject, I'm long-winded, sorry. But, the word art, the world's full of beauty and ugliness or whatever it is. Art is something, whatever it is, whatever all of us collectively or independently think it is, it has to be made by human beings. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it art, We don't want to say artificial because we have other implications of that. But the truth is, our ability to artifice, to do things, is profound. It may be one of the significant things of us as human beings. And what we do it with, well, we're clearly using up all the Earth's resources. I won't say we're always doing creative things, but it clearly is a tendency of human beings to create, And whether we do it good, bad, positive or negative, we're still in it. And a group of people who are our ages and have done what we've done, we're just various examples of it.
Okay.
I'd like to present you with That was beautiful, Mel. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me where I'm coming from.
Well, as we said in my junior high school, your kindness will never be obliterated.
Well, so I'm going to pick up on a couple of words that you just mentioned, the positive and the negative and the idea of beauty or not.
Thank you.
And I wonder, Nancy, if you would talk to us about your work and your and Ed's work, and it strikes me as work that is quite often discussed not in terms of beauty, but in terms of confrontation. So maybe you could talk to us about those kinds of aesthetic decisions, but also subject decisions that you make as you're creating works.
So we get the easy questions.
Is that an easy
Do you
question?
want to do that one? Would you? You could do it if you want. Well,
So let's look at a work like this.
okay.
That's an easy one.
That's an easy one. Well, it's called the Ozymandias Parade. So there we have our poet in there. And it's really, the horses are life-size, so everything is scaled to that. So it's quite large. And it's like a ship of state going forward. And it plays a cacophony of military marching music. And so coming forward off of the horse, the white horse, is, shall we say, the president or the premier or the whoever the head guy is, who happened to been cast, Monty Factor happened to be cast for that piece. And he's the president. And then behind him on the right-hand side is the vice president, but he's going the wrong way, and he's sort of, blowing the trumpet in the wrong way. And then the general is riding on the back of the overtaxed payer. And so all of this is coming through. And so the general is actually controlling the whole thing. So it's really, it's a lot about the, I guess the word is the industrial military complex, and it certainly is. I mean, it takes it to a great extreme. And all around the edges are different flags from different countries, and as it moves around the world, we change the colors of the lights and the big flag. And so, like right now, the piece is in Frankfurt, and so it has German colors instead of the American. And
Still works. so
Still works, yeah, and it doesn't matter when you change the colors. I mean, it really doesn't. And then it's going to Switzerland, and so with the Swiss, we'll see how they deal with it. And it's funny because there's a question that's asked, the main figures wear a mask that says yes or no, and before the piece is put up, there's a questionnaire that's sent around to ask, do you think your government is doing a good job? And so they always have no masks on. You know, nobody ever says yes. But I'm wondering if the Swiss will. You know, we'll find out. It's going there in the springtime, and yeah, it's fun.
And so do you find, like Ed and like Betty, that the kind of narrative that you're telling in that work develops as you go along, or do you set out with very clear...
No, it definitely develops, and it gets more and more ridiculous and more absurd as you go. I mean, it has a little, what do you call them? You know, the little wooden drum, but whatever it is, but it's a pork barrel funding, so it's got the little noses from little porks and things like that on it, and has lots and lots of military thing, and it's covered with money, and the general is holding all the money, and the president thinks that he has control because he has the red phone, but actually the general has the button that would push it, that makes it happen. So yeah, it has some serious statements to it, although, you know, I don't think it's too hard to read when you see it.
And would you say that this is a parody? It seems to have quite a kind of theatrical humor to it almost, along with that very serious political message.
Yeah, well, there's not, what's wrong with humor?
No, nothing is wrong
I mean,
with
there's,
humor.
you know, there's got to have some fun in life. And, you know, artists do too, and you do have to have some fun. And sometimes, you know, this is where you have your fun. And this piece was a lot of fun to make, and it was a lot of fun to work on, and it's a lot of fun to exhibit because it is just that. Yeah, I guess it is a parody, but nonetheless, as, you know, as an artist, you're allowed to say those things.
You know, when I taught at Chenard in 65, 66, right about then was when the Kienholz, I think it's called the illegal operation, the plexiglass, you know, or plastic with arrows and
Oh,
shooting.
no, that's the birthday.
Is that the bird? Okay,
Yeah.
but anyway, title or not, I remember the, you know, the work in particular, and recommended to my students that they go see it, because that was a period when abortion was a major topic in this society and had not been changed. Still is.
Here we are.
Here we are
2011,
dealing with it
We're
again.
having the same discussion.
Yeah. And I
Just
think most of the themes that we've dealt with in our lives are still with
Are
us.
still with us, I think so too.
Yeah.
I mean, just, yeah, they are.
And it's interesting now that we, as part of the Pacific Standard Time project, are seeing so many of your works in museums and galleries across the region, and they still seem so pertinent and so relevant. It's interesting to see how contemporary audiences are responding to works that I guess were originally made at moments when, you know, many of your young audience weren't even alive, and yet they still seem so vital. Very quickly before, and shortly we'll open this up to our audience because I'm sure that people have a lot to say about what you've talked about and about the works that we've seen tonight. But I would be interested to know what you thought about exhibiting assemblage sculptures and these sculptures and works that are made from found materials and found objects. What happens when we put those in a museum? I mean, I suppose, George, we should ask you what it was like in 1961 at the Art of Assemblage at the Museum of Modern Art, and what it's like now in 2011.
Well, those both are very good years.
They're two of my favorites.
Every year, it's like wine. You know, there's some beautiful stuff. But the thing that I sometimes say, I'm a junk sculptor, and it gets it right out in front. A painter once stood next to me and said, "It must be great just to be able to say that, right? what you're doing is junk. If they say, oh, that looks like junk, you're right, it is junk, you know, and then that's the raw materials, you know, that's it. So the idea that trash, things that people threw away, have another shot at it, you know.
They're recycled.
Yeah, before they even use that word recycle, that's what we do. So the insistence on, and this I think is like a blowback from this town particularly, where everything has to be new. What's your new movie? What's your latest grosses this weekend? You know? And then when a painter says, have you ever taken a good look at what I did 10 years ago?
Yeah.
You know, so the fetishization of the new somehow it makes anything that is old devalued. And I think part of what one has to say to, you know, these materials that are coming into the work of art can include both the old and the new. You know,
Underneath all this, I think, and listening to George, I think there's a whole class structure that happens within the arts. And right now, this is the ghetto talking, okay?
Ghetto with the Getty? What did you say?
That's what he said.
On the money.
This could get very rough in here, you know that.
They're all happy, man.
No, there's a reception afterwards.
Yeah.
No, there is the new, and there is the clean, and there is the white, and there is the polished, and there is the finish fetish, and there's all of that working. And that's an approach to getting something said that someone needs to get said. At the same time, we often use other materials to work, but there is some political action that happens between what we do and those finish fetish surfaces. And so that when you start talking about the museum, you start talking about hanging your stuff on the wall, a lot of those politics start showing up. And those are politics of that realm. I'm not talking about necessarily the bigger issues that some of us deal with, although certainly racism and classism and elitism, all that stuff gets involved in the art world too. Particularly, like, let's say, around women. You know, I was being raised in the art world at a time when Judy Chicago was trying to get her work noticed. And what the art world did to Judy was filthy. It was just filthy. And the things that were said were really very, noxious. But that is going on, and that is, maybe that's a subtext for some of the conversation that we're having here.
But Judy Chicago was here at this museum, right?
The word.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
She spoke quite eloquently.
yeah, I mean, she still persisted. Her work now is quite different. But when
The
you look at that
issues
work
aren't.
now, when you look at the work, you know that success is the best revenge. And there she is right here. The works that are here are really beautiful.
Perhaps on that note, we should open it out to our audience, who I'm sure have thoughts, questions for... I would remind you, if you are in the audience, wait until you have a microphone, because we're recording our event, and otherwise our participants might not hear your question.
I just want, on the piece behind you, is there a way, do you have a narrative of something I can read? I'd love to be and see it in person and know what all of the different, I mean, I'd love to just go and analyze it and know what you've said about each piece. Where can I see it?
Well, you mean see the piece personally?
Yeah.
Well, right now, if you went to the Schön Kunsthal in Frankfurt, Germany, you could see it.
And then Switzerland.
When
And then
is it coming
Basel,
back here?
Switzerland in February, I guess. And But it's written about in different books, and it has pretty much of the explanation.
I'd love to see that in person. It's great. It's just great.
Yeah.
Nancy, could you speak about the piece that is at LACMA this year, the controversy, and talk a little bit about that and the making of it?
I didn't know there was a controversy. So I can't speak
Can I tell
to
you about
that.
the controversy?
Well, if you must.
This is a controversy that I see because, first of all, and maybe you can answer the question, has that piece been exhibited in Europe?
Yes,
In what country?
Germany.
And for how long?
It was in 3 cities.
3 cities. Then it was purchased by Japan?
Right.
Yes. And how long was it exhibited in Japan?
Never was.
It never was. Why wasn't it?
Because the Japanese didn't want to insult the Americans. That was
The
their
Japanese
opinion.
did not
No,
want-
no, you have to, you answer these questions.
So
You're
this
gonna
is
do it
No,
better than
no.
I am.
No.
You really are. I mean,
Just
okay,
to,
I'll tell you the story. The piece was shown at Documenta 5 in Kassel in 1972. It went from there to Berlin, and it went to Dusseldorf. In Dusseldorf, it was bought by a private museum in Japan, and it was taken to Japan.
Yeah.
It was, as you might have noticed, it's large. They didn't have a space to put it up.
Okay.
And so consequently, it was, I guess I never decided never to build a building big enough to put it into, and so it was put into storage. After 40 years, the man that had built this museum died, I guess, and they decided that they didn't want the piece anymore and they wanted to sell it, so the piece now needed to reappear. But it had been in 40 years of bad storage, and it was pretty much trashed, no question about it, and things had been stolen and blah, 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 like things happen after 40 years. You know, you stick them in a garage, you know what they look like 40 years later. So anyhow, it was brought to America and brought to Idaho, and myself and my crew put it back together, and then the Getty asked that it be included in Pacific Standard Time, and LACMA agreed to show it there.
Okay.
So now that's where it is.
Yeah.
And I think that the piece is just as germane today as it was 40 years ago, and I don't think racism is over in America, and I think it is a good thing to be confronted by, to go in to confront yourself, so that you yourself have to go in there and look at it and feel it and make yourself become a real lawyer about it, and to think, okay, now, would I try and stop it, or would I just back up, or what would happen? I mean, I think that's where it is, and there's also many different forms, and I wonder if it's changed. I don't think so, but I wonder if it's changed and different people of different races go in, and maybe they're Muslim and they think, gosh, it's not too comfortable being here in America, being a Muslim. Do they feel something when they go into that piece that's different? I don't know. All I know is the piece is there, and I think it is. It's powerful. It's very, very
Betty,
powerful.
I know that
Yes.
you had some concerns about the piece.
Yeah. But I'm glad that was one of the reasons that I wanted to be here, to see what you had to say about the piece. I know Ed's earlier work, and I've always respected him as an artist, and I know he tackles difficult situations because he was a warrior in putting things out. But I had a lot of questions about this particular piece, especially at this time and this year of the beginning of a big change in the politics.
Well, don't you think a lot of the change in our politics, don't you think there's racism going on right now today in America?
Absolutely.
So do I.
Okay, but my point is, I made a list of questions because I had a very bad reaction to that, because it seemed like there was more going on beside just exhibiting a piece of art that was a powerful piece of art. And I would like to read some of these questions. Okay. First of all, you already explained how the piece came to be in America. Because, well, just because of the way it was, because it never had been reviewed. But it seems to be like a background of places where it's been exhibited that would cause offense, and it certainly caused offense to me. As
What offends you about the piece? What offends you?
That's what I'm going to talk about.
Oh.
That's what I'm going to talk about. First of all, the piece, for those who haven't seen it, is like 5 cars, right? A pickup truck, 5 characters. I don't know how many characters on it, but one of the characters is a black man that has a T-shirt on that says nigger across it.
That's absolutely not true.
It's not true?
Did you go and see it? That is
photograph?
absolutely not true.
It's the
If
photograph
you're
that I
looking
saw.
from photographs, that is absolutely not true about that piece. And if you haven't been to look at it, I don't think you really have the right to describe what that piece is. I really don't. I think it's unfair.
Well, again, there are lots of things that I can complain about that I don't want to
But I
look at.
still
I don't
think
want to
it's
go.
unfair. That is
Who
not
said
what
it's
it
not
is.
about fair, is it?
Okay, life is
Nancy,
unfair.
would you like
It's my turn to talk.
Go
explain
ahead and talk. I don't
the
mind you
pieces?
talking, but I don't want you to describe a piece of art incorrectly.
How can my word, yes, but how can my
That's
word,
all.
how can my words destroy the piece of art? That your piece of art is already
Because you're
there.
not describing it as the piece actually is.
Okay.
Why don't you, Ed, let you describe it. You're an
All right,
independent.
if somebody showed me a photograph and it has a T-shirt on, does it have a
There is
man?
no T-shirt.
Are you going to leave us?
I'm going to be back in 2 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Does it have the man who's supposed to be the black man lying on the floor?
Okay, here's how it works.
Okay.
Why don't we go on where? Do you have a close-up of the something in there where we can look at it? Keep going.
No.
I've got these. These
Keep
are the
going.
only
This
ones
all
I've
we
got.
have?
Yeah.
Okay. There are 5 automobiles, and it's an outdoor at night piece. And the 5 automobiles illuminate these central figures. And the central figures are white men that have on masks, so they're disguising themselves, and they are castrating a black man. However, the black man, for his body, his whole body, is an oil pan full of water that has some letters that float. And the letters it has a pump, and the letters move around. And so what you saw, some photographer put together and put the word nigger, and that's not at all what it is, that they float around.
What are the letters?
The letters are G-I-N-E-N-R.
Oh, it's like peace and love.
It's like peace and love. If
Okay.
the letters get together, but it is a very cruel, cruel piece.
Okay.
And the men that are doing this abhorrent act are, it's hard to imagine what you say about them. Also, to make it even worse, in one of the cars is a young boy who is sitting watching this happen. And obviously, his father brought him along to teach him this, how to be a racist and how to behave in such an abhorrent fashion. There's also a white woman in the truck who is kind of being, you can see her up there on the left, you know, who is, I don't know whether she's vomiting or what she's doing by this scene, but she's in there.
Is it okay for me to talk now?
It's fine, as long as you
Okay.
understand the piece correctly.
Well, well, this is the way I feel about the piece that's in there, because there's some things that I just didn't want to even support by going and see this piece. It's like, I feel that it is humiliating to the black community, but maybe they don't even bother to go to LACMA. And I know the piece was created because it was around an original incident that happened that is probably still happening somewhere in this country today.
It's happening in Los Angeles tonight.
That's right. Hey, this is one of my questions.
Let me help you
Will the
out.
5, because it pertains to what you want to talk about.
Ed, did you want
Will,
to?
no, I want
Oh,
to say this, please. Will 5-car stud be a turn-on for the Vikings and other hate groups?
No, they are already turned on. The United States of America already turned them on.
Okay?
For those of you who don't know about the Vikings are a small group of Los Angeles Sheriff Department officers, a little kind of nice fraternity. And to get into this fraternity, you get to get the little tattoo that you get in the back of your neck of a Viking. Sorry. To get into that fraternity, you have to kill a black or a brown man in Los Angeles, California. That's going on tonight. Now, I see Ed Kienholz, frankly, as an investigative reporter. He goes out, he's always going to be rough, and he's always going to bother somebody. He's a very raw artist, and that's why he's, I think, a great artist. He'll take the issue that nobody wants to deal with, that nobody wants to look at, and he'll put it right up in your face. If you don't like 5-car stud, go out and do something about the goddamn Vikings in this city.
Oh. Would
You
you
need a
mind
mic.
waiting for a microphone? Sorry.
I see is it working? Can you hear me? I've been in that exhibition several times. I watch the people go in, I hear them come out. My reaction, I've seen people kneel down and write coward about these people that are doing this horrific thing to this human being. You feel when you're in there that you have no voice, that you can't scream for help, that you cannot save this human being. The people that come out are crying. I go over to them and talk to them to help them get through it. They want to send other people. I've sent young people in to see what is going on. And for me, my reaction, and I was up all night after I saw it, was similar to the concentration camps. If we didn't have the concentration camps, you wouldn't believe that that happened. If you didn't see this, people would have said, they never did this to another human being. And that's the reaction that the people come out and talk to me about. They don't want to forget that this is going on right now to other people. Black, white, whatever color you are, people do this to other people. And if you don't see it and you take it away, you don't believe it was ever done.
Can you address this? It's not that we're upset about the art itself, it's the timing. We finally have an African-American man in the White House, and the LACMA hierarchy decides that this is the year that they need to bring this piece and show it here, when they haven't been showing very many African-American artists at all. So can you imagine that maybe the black community would be offended by it? Not just Betye Saar, but the entire black community. And the whole point of museums is to include everybody, to everybody have kind of an educational experience. And is this the educational experience we need right now?
But don't confuse Ed Kienholz's statement with the fact that LACMA's full of shit.
That's the point. That's the point. That's the point.
And one thing I want to say is that I'm not defending it from being from the black community, but just for me personally, my experience, I wrote an essay about this piece because it moved me so much, is because to me, it represents human rights. And when you go visit the piece, what you're doing is you're experiencing a piece that to me was very familiar from American history and currently happens today. It's not a black or a white thing. It's about all races, because all races and all people were affected until 1964 when the Civil Rights came out. And for me, I'm from a background where I'm Japanese American. It's not just about race, it's more. It's like people's civil liberties. It's the fact that people can inflict violence on other people. It's about all violence against all races. And to me, when you go there, and the point of going there, it's not just seeing a photo, because what it says to you, there's a quote by Einstein that says, the world is a terrible place. I'm probably misquoting him in some way, not just because of the people that do wrong, but for the people that don't do anything at all. And the point of going there is because, to me, it made me realize you're witnessing it. If you've ever been in a situation of street violence where you've been attacked, and I've been in such a situation, the amount of people that stand around and don't do anything at all to help you, but then later they might say, oh, are you okay? It's like, well, why didn't you help me when I was being attacked? And the point of this piece to me says, you're witnessing it now. Stand up and say something. Stand up and do something about hate crimes. For people of races, language, religion, cultures, it's going on right now. It's like people are getting killed over these things. And we are all witnessing. When you go there, you can't say, oh, I don't know about it, because now you just witness what goes on. It's not up to people. There's no democracy in taking violence into your own hands. Sorry.
I think we had a question in the middle. If we can pass a microphone along from someone.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your discussion. It's been. I just want to say, we're all sitting in a room where somebody said, I really like the Nazis. And I think we have to address that in the context of what we're talking about and what you meant by that.
Oh, sure. I was 10 years old. I had no idea of who they were. I was operating with a 10-year-old mind and 10-year-old eyes. And visually, the Nazi stuff, we could call it the German stuff, was really, really cool looking. Didn't have anything to do with even the history of any of that, certainly that we know of right now. Yeah. I used to, in the course of Life magazine or anything I could get my hands on, I was looking at the uniforms, those long leather coats, the great hats, and they had better helmets than anybody else. The planes were hipper than anybody else. I didn't know what the swastika meant at that time, but that funny little guy that stood in front of those 50-foot curtains and the eagle and all that stuff, just visually for me, was absolutely fascinating. I didn't know what it meant. I know what it looked like. Does that help you out at all?
Well, I don't know my microphone, but I would say that to a certain degree, when you bring images into art, there's a certain, whether you, and this relates.
I would say that when you bring images into art, whether it's a very difficult subject about a lynching, or if it's a Nazi symbol,
It's
and
not.
you bring in it is a Nazi symbol.
No, it's not.
A swastika is.
No, it's not.
It's also a Nazi symbol. I'm sorry.
No, it's not. Look at it very closely. You see, I've obviously had this conversation before.
Right.
If you look.
I'm not suggesting that you meant it as a Nazi. I'm not suggesting that at all. But it is a symbol with a certain power to
And I'm
shock.
suggesting to you that you didn't see the symbol.
No, I saw this. I saw that it was backwards.
Does it make
I saw that, but it has power because of where it came from. And you specifically, and I'm not criticizing, I'm saying you specifically brought it to that. You mentioned the Nazis.
Let me give you a little bit of background here. Are you aware that that can go either way? That swastika can point in any direction? The direction I used it at had to do with the American Indian. The Japanese used it. I think another Eastern religion or something used it as a religious symbol. India, yeah. So I understand what you're saying. I would hope that, and I would suggest that where I was coming from was not what I hope was not the whole Nazi place. I wasn't coming from there. Even as a young adult, when I made these pieces, I wasn't coming from there at all.
I'd like to talk about the 800-pound elephant in the room. I was just at the Weizmann Gallery. Out of 20 artists, there's one woman.
I can't.
There's one woman represented at the Weizmann Gallery. So there was only one woman from that whole movement who had any significance at all in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So what is this? This is where the real misogyny and racism comes in. It's against women. Women artists. They're all represented at the very fringe galleries, but they're nowhere ever in any of the art institutions at 50%. So men are 80% better than women artists. I don't know, every art class I've been in has had 90% women. Okay, who is making all these decisions at the Getty, at the LACMA, that men artists are 80% better than women? That's one comment. I'd like to make a comment on the Kienholz piece, 5-card stud. I grew up in the South. I had crosses on my front yard because my mother was a civil rights person. I don't have a black skin. I don't. But when I walked into that piece, and I was just blown back to the wall, you have to be in the sand where this is taking place. You have to be in there. You have to physically get your toes in there. I had sandals on. I had to be in the same physical space as those horrible, horrible, they're animals. And I saw people walking around and talking and have babies and walking around and looking at it. It took me an hour to get to the center of the piece. I will never forget it. But you have to remember, this is the time, right now, right here, when we are in Afghanistan. We're killing people in Pakistan, in Senegal. We're killing people all over the world. And yes, Obama's our president, but we're killing people all over the world. We have 800 bases of military, and the generals are in control. And the president might think he has his finger on the button, but he doesn't. He doesn't. And I say, go for it. Go see the Kienholz and be disgusted.
Oh, I think we have a question at the back.
Well, we're warming it up.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us here tonight. I think Kienholz is a wonderful artist. His job as an artist is to create something that provokes emotion. And emotion is something that is personalized by every one of us. But my question is to George. George, when and what inspired you or compelled you to start adding the word love to your pieces?
Well, I never went to an art school, okay? I started out making gifts for people for a birthday or a wedding or a poetry reading. I used to try and read my poetry and I'd have heart palpitations, even in a living room with only 3 friends. And so I found that I could take a little pedestal and put a typewriter on it and put that on the stage, and I could go back in the audience and enjoy the evening. So these were gifts of love in the beginning, and I decided that it was what, well, Wallace Berman had, art is love is God, and I thought love was the keystone in that arch. And I wanted, it's an imperative to me that if I don't love it, it doesn't get the LOVE on it and it doesn't go out into the world. A lot of times for benefits, I don't go to the closet and get an old lithograph. I start a new piece for a benefit, and when it gets to that point where, hey, I really want to keep it for myself and not give it to the fucking benefit, then I know, all right, LOVE.
Well, I think maybe love is a really wonderful place to settle our evening tonight. I feel like we've had kind of a cathartic evening, I hope, but we, alas, have to wend our way home. I would just like you to join me in thanking our 5 participants this evening.